Security guards with 9 police dogs surround a black boy at the airport. That was exactly what was happening at the international terminal of John F. Kennedy Airport when all the passengers stopped to witness a scene they would never forget. Tyler Washington, just 12 years old, was standing alone near Gate 23, holding only a worn school backpack and a crumpled plane ticket. In a matter of seconds, 9 German shepherds completely surrounded him, barking furiously, while 6 uniformed security guards approached with their hands on their handcuffs. "Kid, don't move a muscle," shouted Sergeant Miller, a burly 45-year-old man who clearly loved to show his authority. "You're in a restricted area." What had started as an ordinary morning quickly turned into the kind of situation that ruins careers and makes global headlines. Dozens of cell phones were already recording the scene, capturing every second of the humiliation of a black child being treated like a terrorist at one of the world's busiest airports. Tyler didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't try to run. At 12, he had already learned that sudden movements by boys who looked like him were interpreted as threats by people like Sergeant Miller. Instead, he kept his hands visible and responded with a calmness that was disturbing for his age. "Sir, I'm waiting for my connection to London." "My flight leaves in an hour," Tyler said, his clear voice cutting through the chaos of barking. "Can I show you my ticket?" Miller laughed sarcastically. "Sure, kid. A kid your age traveling alone to London? What's the next lie? Are you going to tell me your dad's a diplomat?" What the arrogant sergeant didn't notice was the particular gleam that passed through Tyler's eyes at that moment. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was the look of someone who knew something others didn't. There, surrounded by 9 police dogs and 6 security guards who had already decided he was guilty before asking a single question, Tyler stood motionless, like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If this story of institutional prejudice has sparked your outrage, you can't miss what happens when the arrogance of those who abuse power meets the preparedness of someone who always knew this day would come. Subscribe to the channel to find out how 12 years of age were enough to teach grown men a lesson they will never forget. Sergeant Miller snatched the ticket from Tyler's hands with unnecessary force, examining it as if it were evidence of a crime. "First class to London? Seriously?" His laughter echoed through the terminal, attracting even more curious glances. "What kind of scam are you trying to pull, kid?" Tyler stood up straight, but inside he felt the familiar knot in his stomach that always came when adults decided that his presence in inappropriate places was automatically suspicious. At 12, he had already been through similar interrogations in department stores, golf clubs, and even the library of the private school where he studied on a full scholarship. "Can I call my chaperone?" he asked calmly. "She must be looking for me." "Chaperone?" Miller snorted. "Sure, and I'm Santa Claus. Let's see if that story holds up when we get to security." He signaled to the other officers. "Take him in for questioning. I want to know where he stole that ticket." It was at that moment that Tyler noticed something that reassured him. 3 of the security guards seemed uncomfortable with the situation. The youngest, Officer Rodriguez, whispered something to his colleague next to him, clearly questioning the procedures. But Miller had that toxic authority that silences questions in rigid hierarchies. "Wait," said the blonde woman in a suit who had been watching the scene from a few feet away. "Is that Tyler Washington?" She approached quickly, her face red with indignation. "What the hell are you doing?" Miller turned irritably. "Ma'am, please step back. We are dealing with a security situation." "Security situation?" The woman's voice rose an octave. "This boy is my charge. I am Jennifer Morrison, diplomatic advisor. Tyler is my temporary ward and is under British consular protection." The entire terminal fell silent. Passengers held their breath. Even the police dogs seemed to sense the change in energy, some lowering their heads as if ashamed of the situation. Miller paled, but his arrogance was greater than his common sense. "How do I know you're telling the truth? Anyone can make up a story." Jennifer took out her phone and dialed a number. "British Embassy? This is Jennifer Morrison. I need to speak to the Consul General immediately. We have a diplomatic situation at JFK involving a child under our protection." Tyler watched the growing panic in Miller's eyes. For the first time in his 12 years of life, he saw an adult who had abused his authority against him facing real consequences. But what impressed him most was the composure he maintained, even as a child. As if he had been born for moments like this. "Tyler, Jennifer knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" "I'm sorry, I went to the bathroom for 5 minutes and—" "It's okay, Ms. Morrison," Tyler replied, his voice carrying a disturbing maturity. This was expected. It always happens. The simplicity of that sentence hit everyone present like a punch in the stomach. A 12-year-old child should not have that resignation toward prejudice. And she certainly should not speak as if she already expected to be treated like a criminal at international airports. Miller tried to regain control. "Well, if there's any misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. Jennifer stood up slowly, diplomatic authority replacing any previous kindness. "Sergeant Miller, yes, I read your badge. You just surrounded a 12-year-old black child with 9 police dogs for no reason. At an international airport. With dozens of witnesses filming." The silence was deafening. Miller looked around and for the first time noticed how many cell phones were pointed at him. How many people had recorded every second of the humiliation he had inflicted on a child. What the arrogant sergeant didn't know was that Tyler Washington wasn't just an ordinary child with a first-class ticket. And in less than 20 minutes, when the truth about who he really was came to light, those 9 police dogs would seem like the least of Miller's problems. While Jennifer argued on the phone with embassy officials, Tyler calmly watched Sergeant Miller desperately trying to save his career. What impressed the passengers most was not only the boy's composure, but the way he seemed to be analyzing every movement, every word, as if he were collecting evidence. "Ms. Morrison," Tyler said quietly, "that man over there recorded everything on his cell phone." He discreetly pointed to a man in a suit who had filmed the entire approach. "And that lady too. The one in the blue coat." Jennifer paused in the middle of her call, impressed by the child's detailed observation. Tyler had mentally mapped out all the witnesses, all the camera angles, as if he knew exactly what he would need later. Miller tried a new approach, his voice now laden with false courtesy. "Look, maybe we can settle this amicably. The boy is safe, no one was hurt." "Amicably?" Jennifer hung up the phone, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Sergeant Miller, you just created an international diplomatic incident. The Consul General is on his way, along with representatives from the U.S. State Department." Miller's face turned gray. For the first time, the gravity of the situation began to penetrate his arrogance. "Wait, this doesn't have to go beyond this room, right? It was just a misunderstanding." Tyler approached Jennifer and whispered something in her ear. She nodded gravely and dialed another number. "I need to speak with Ambassador Washington immediately." "Yes, it's about your grandson." The silence that followed was deafening. All the security guards present froze. Miller himself looked as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Ambassador Washington," stammered the sergeant, looking at Tyler with new understanding dawning in his eyes. Tyler kept his expression neutral, but Jennifer didn't miss the opportunity. "Tyler Washington, grandson of Ambassador James Washington, our representative to the UN for Human Rights. The child you just publicly humiliated is the son of American diplomats returning from an educational mission in London." Cell phones around them continued to record. The story was spreading across social media in real time. "Black child humiliated at JFK was grandson of American ambassador." The hashtags were already going viral. Miller tried to approach Tyler, his hands shaking visibly. "Boy. Tyler. I didn't know You didn't know what?" Tyler spoke directly to the sergeant for the first time, his voice clear and firm. "Didn't you know that black children can also travel first class? Didn't you know they should be treated with basic dignity? Or didn't you know that your actions would have consequences?" The maturity of those words coming from the mouth of a 12-year-old made several people in the terminal gulp. Tyler wasn't just responding, he was conducting an interrogation. Jennifer opened her purse and took out a gold business card. "Sergeant Miller, here is the direct number to the ambassador's office. I'm sure he will be very interested in discussing JFK security protocols with your superiors." It was at that moment that Officer Rodriguez, the young security guard who had questioned the procedures from the beginning, approached. "Sergeant Miller," he said firmly, "I need to talk to you. Now." Miller turned away irritably, but Rodriguez didn't back down. "Sir, I recorded our initial approach conversation. The audio is on my body camera. When you said these kinds of people, and mentioned teaching him his place, it was all recorded." Miller's world instantly collapsed. Not only had he abused a diplomatically protected child, but there was recorded evidence of his racist motivations. Tyler watched the exchange with scientific interest, as if studying a social experiment. Then he turned to Jennifer. "Ms. Morrison, my grandfather always says that situations like this are educational opportunities. Maybe we can turn this into something productive." Tyler's preternatural calm was almost unsettling. At 12 years old, he wasn't just dealing with institutional racism, he was orchestrating a systematic and intelligent response. Jennifer smiled, a mixture of admiration and pride. "Tyler, your grandfather is going to be very proud of how you handled this." "He always prepared me for moments like this," Tyler replied simply. "He said they would come, and when they did, I should be ready." What Miller couldn't have imagined was that those moments like this weren't just anticipated by the Washington family, they were meticulously prepared for. And in the next 20 minutes, when the full extent of that preparation came to light, 9 police dogs would seem like the least of the sergeant's problems. The arrival of the British Consul General was just the beginning. In less than 15 minutes, Terminal 4 at JFK became the epicenter of an international diplomatic crisis. Official cars with consular plates arrived in convoy, while journalists began to gather outside, drawn by rumors that something big was happening. Miller watched with growing horror as men in suits approached with diplomatic credentials and State Department officials. His 20-year career was evaporating before his eyes, and the worst was yet to come. "Sergeant Miller," said an authoritative voice behind him. It was Captain Reynolds, his immediate superior, accompanied by 2 internal investigators. "I need your service weapons, badge, and equipment. Now." "Captain, I can explain," Miller tried, but was cut off. "You can explain later. To the federal investigators who are already on their way." Reynolds couldn't hide his fury. "You just created an international incident involving the grandson of an American ambassador. This is going to end up on the Secretary of State's desk." Tyler watched calmly as Miller was stripped of all authority. But what struck those present most was the complete absence of satisfaction on the child's face. There was no triumph, no revenge, just the serene observation of someone who had predicted exactly this outcome. Jennifer knelt beside Tyler. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "Sad," Tyler replied, surprising everyone. Sad because this could have been avoided if people simply treated others with basic dignity. The maturity of that response echoed through the terminal like a punch to the collective gut. A 12-year-old child was teaching a lesson in humanity to adults who should have known better. It was at that moment that Officer Rodriguez approached again, this time carrying his official tablet. "Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice firm and clear. "I must inform you that our initial conversation was recorded in its entirety by the airport security monitoring system." Miller paled even further, if that was possible. Rodriguez continued, his conscience finally overcoming years of toxic hierarchy. "Your exact words were, 'These types of people always try to pass themselves off as something they're not. Let's teach this kid his place.'" This was said before we even checked any documentation. A deadly silence fell. Miller's racist words were now officially recorded, documented, and witnessed by multiple federal and diplomatic authorities. The British Consul General, a distinguished man named Sir Michael Pemberton, finally arrived on the scene. His first act was to kneel respectfully before Tyler. "Young Mr. Washington," he said in an impeccable Oxford accent, "on behalf of Her Majesty, I would like to apologize deeply for the treatment you received on American soil." Tyler extended his hand politely. "Thank you, Sir Michael. But I believe the apologies should come from our own compatriots." The dignity of that response caused several people present to bow their heads in shame. It was then that the real consequences arrived. Captain Reynolds' phone rang. It was the mayor of New York. Then it was the governor. Next, someone from the White House itself. "Sergeant Miller," Reynolds said as he hung up the phone, "you haven't just lost your job. There's a federal investigation being opened for violation of the civil rights of a child under diplomatic protection. The FBI lawyers want to talk to you." Miller tried one last desperate gambit. "Look, maybe we can work this out internally. The boy is fine, no one was really hurt." "No one was hurt." Tyler spoke directly to Miller for the first time since the situation began. "Sergeant, you surrounded a 12-year-old child with 9 police dogs because you thought he didn't belong in a certain place. Dozens of people recorded it. It's spreading across social media right now." Tyler took out his own phone. An iPhone that Miller had assumed was stolen for Tyler already has 500,000 views. People are sharing the video and discussing how black children are treated by public safety. Miller looked at the screen and saw his own face being displayed in dozens of different videos, all capturing the moment he publicly humiliated an innocent child. But more importantly, Tyler continued, his voice maintaining that disconcerting calm, my grandfather always taught me that moments like these are opportunities for growth. For everyone involved. Jennifer watched, fascinated. At 12 years old, Tyler was conducting a masterclass in diplomacy and dignity. Sir Michael approached Miller. Sergeant, British authorities will also be conducting a formal investigation. This incident will be reported directly to the Foreign Office. Your conduct represents a national security issue for our citizens in transit. Miller's world was completely falling apart. It wasn't just his job, his pension, his professional references, his reputation. Everything was being destroyed by his inability to see a black child as worthy of respectful treatment. Rodriguez approached Tyler. Young man, I want to apologize personally. I should have questioned the orders from the beginning. Tyler nodded graciously. Thank you, Officer Rodriguez. It takes courage to question superiors, especially when there is hierarchical pressure. Actually, Rodriguez hesitated, then continued, there's something else you need to know. This isn't the first time Miller has made racist comments. There's a pattern of behavior that I should have reported earlier. Captain Reynolds turned sharply to Rodriguez. Explain that. Sir, in the last 6 months, I have observed at least 5 occasions when Sergeant Miller made discriminatory comments about black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern passengers. There are other officers who will testify to this. Tyler watched as the network of silent complicity began to unravel. One child had exposed not just one racist individual, but an entire system of tolerated and covert discrimination. Jennifer received a call. It was Ambassador Washington, Tyler's grandfather. She handed the phone to the boy. Hi, Grandpa, Tyler said simply. The voice on the other end was clear and laden with controlled emotion. Tyler, my boy, are you okay? I'm fine, Grandpa. Just like you always said I would be. You handled the situation like a true Washington. I'm proud of you. Tyler smiled for the first time since the situation began. Thanks, Grandpa. When will you arrive? My plane lands in 2 hours. There are some very important people who want to talk to airport management about security protocols. Miller, listening to the conversation, finally understood the full magnitude of what he had done. He hadn't just humiliated a child, he had attacked the family of one of the country's most respected diplomats, creating an incident that now involved multiple levels of government. When Tyler hung up the phone, he looked at Miller one last time. Sergeant, he said, I hope this experience helps you rethink how you treat people. Everyone deserves dignity, regardless of age, skin color, or appearance. With those words, a 12-year-old child had taught the former sergeant a lesson that men 3 times his age still needed to learn. As Miller was escorted out of the terminal in utter disgrace, surrounded by federal investigators and in front of the cameras of dozens of journalists, one question hung in the air: would the public humiliation of one prejudiced man be enough to transform an entire system, or had Tyler Washington prepared something even more profound to ensure that no other child would ever have to go through what he had just endured? 6 months after the incident at JFK, Tyler Washington walked through the same hallways of the terminal, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. At 12 years old, he had inadvertently become the catalyst for a transformation that no one could have predicted. The airport now displayed signs in multiple languages proclaiming dignity and respect for all passengers, a policy implemented directly by the federal administration after what the media dubbed the Washington incident. Body cameras were mandatory for all security agents, and a new anti-discrimination training protocol had been implemented at all U.S. airports. Officer Rodriguez, promoted to supervisor after his courage in testifying against Miller, awaited Tyler and Jennifer at the departure gate. How is our young ambassador? He asked with a genuine smile, extending his hand respectfully. Tyler shook his hand firmly. Fine, thank you. How are the changes going here? Transformative, Rodriguez replied honestly. We had to let go of 3 other officers who had a similar history to Miller. But most importantly, we've managed to create an environment where situations like that can no longer happen quietly. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an official delegation. The new director of security at JFK, an African-American woman named Captain Williams, approached respectfully. "Mr. Washington, it's an honor to welcome you back. I'd like to introduce you to the new recruits who are being trained specifically in the protocol we developed based on your experience." Tyler followed her to a training room where 15 new airport security agents were watching a presentation on operational dignity and discrimination prevention. On the screen, images of Tyler himself surrounded by the 9 police dogs were used as an example of how not to proceed. "What we see in this video," the instructor explained, "is the result of unchecked biases and poorly applied protocols. A 12-year-old child had to teach trained adults about basic dignity." One of the recruits raised his hand. "Ma'am, what consequences did Sergeant Miller face?" Captain Williams looked at Tyler, who nodded, allowing her to answer. "Former Sergeant Miller was fired immediately, lost his 20-year pension, was federally prosecuted for civil rights violations, and is facing criminal charges. He currently works as a night security guard at a shopping mall, earning a third of what he made here. His career in public safety is permanently over." The silence in the room was heavy. Tyler approached the microphone. "May I say something?" "Of course," Captain Williams replied, clearly honored by the participation. "What happened to Mr. Miller was not revenge," Tyler said, his voice carrying that maturity that impressed everyone. "It was the natural consequences of his choices. He decided to treat a child as a threat based solely on the color of his skin. The system worked exactly as it should when discrimination is exposed." He paused, looking at each recruit. "You have a huge responsibility. Every person who passes through this airport deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of age, color, accent, or appearance. Not because it's company policy, but because it's the right thing to do." The applause was spontaneous and prolonged. Several recruits seemed moved by the profound simplicity of those words coming from someone who should be concerned only with video games and homework. Later, in the airport's executive office, Tyler met with Jennifer and a delegation of federal officials for the signing ceremony of the Tyler Washington Airport Dignity Protection Act, federal legislation that established strict protocols against discrimination on all American public transportation. Ambassador James Washington, Tyler's grandfather, had arrived especially for the occasion. At 67, he was an internationally respected figure for his work in human rights. "Tyler," he said, placing a hand on his grandson's shoulder, "you did in one day what many activists take decades to achieve." "It wasn't just me, Grandpa," Tyler replied. "It was Officer Rodriguez having the courage to speak the truth. It was Ms. Morrison protecting me. It was the system working when the right people made the right choices." The ceremony was broadcast live to multiple countries. Tyler signed documents alongside senators, representatives from the Department of Transportation, and civil aviation authorities. At 12 years old, he was officially influencing national policy. During the speeches, it was revealed that the case had generated more than 50 million views globally, inspiring conversations about child discrimination in dozens of countries. Airports in the United Kingdom, Canada, and Brazil had already implemented adapted versions of the new American protocols. Most surprising, however, was the letter Tyler had received the week before. It was from Miller. "Dear Tyler," the letter began in shaky handwriting. "I don't expect forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that your last words to me that day changed my life. I'm in therapy to deal with prejudices I didn't even know I had. I lost my job, my pension, and my pride, but I gained something more important, the chance to be a better person. Thank you for teaching me dignity when I didn't know how to teach it to you." Tyler had read the letter several times. During the ceremony, when asked about forgiveness and reconciliation, he surprised everyone. "I believe people can change," he said into the microphone. "Mr. Miller lost everything because of his choices, but if he really learned from it, then at least something positive came out of a bad situation." The magnanimity of those words coming from a child who had been publicly humiliated left more than a few adults with tears in their eyes. 2 years later, Tyler was already an international speaker on dignity and civil rights. He had spoken at the UN, at prestigious universities, and to human rights organizations. His children's book, The Airport Where I Learned About Respect, had become a worldwide bestseller, with all proceeds donated to anti-discrimination education programs. Officer Rodriguez had been promoted to Regional Director of Security, implementing the Tyler protocols at 12 major airports. Captain Williams had received federal recognition for leading the most successful cultural transformation in the history of American civil aviation. Miller, truth be told, had kept his word. After losing everything, he had devoted himself to volunteer work in underserved communities, specifically teaching at-risk youth about the dangers of prejudice. His public humiliation had turned into genuine humility. But the most impressive transformation was Tyler himself. At age 14, when he returned to JFK for an official visit, he was welcomed as a dignitary. The same terminal where he had been surrounded by police dogs now welcomed him with diplomatic honors. "Did you know that day would change everything?" a reporter asked during a press conference. Tyler smiled with the precocious wisdom that characterized him. "I knew I had to choose between being a victim or being an example. I chose to be an example." "And what advice would you give to other children who face discrimination?" "Always maintain your dignity," he replied without hesitation. "People who discriminate want you to react with anger or fear, because that justifies their prejudice. When you react calmly and intelligently, you force the world to see who you really are." That afternoon, Tyler boarded a plane to London again, this time on an official trip to speak at the British Parliament about children's rights. At 14, he was officially the youngest human rights advisor in history. As the plane took off, he looked out the window at the JFK terminal. Where he had once seen humiliation, he now saw transformation. Where others would have harbored anger, he had planted change. The best revenge against prejudice was not to destroy those who discriminate, it was to build a world where discrimination became impossible. Tyler Washington had learned this at age 12, and now he was teaching the world that dignity has no age, color, or limit. If this story touched your heart and awakened your desire to make a difference, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unlikely people, at the most unexpected moments. Because true greatness knows no age, it just chooses to appear when the world needs it most.